Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to the Science of Scheduling, a webinar with Madkudu and Chili Piper. I'm joined today by Emil, Manjan of Chili Piper, and Francis, co-founder and chief revenue officer of Madkudu. And over the next 30 minutes, we're going to try to run you through the science of scheduling a demo, and hopefully give you guys some insights into how we approach looking at this very specific part of the customer journey, which is the instant someone begins to show intent through scheduling a demo to the point where you get on a phone call with a prospect. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. We got a lot of ground to cover, and we want to leave as much time to talk with you guys as possible. So I'll let our hosts take it away.
Awesome, thanks Liam. So quick obligatory introduction into Chili Piper. Chili Piper helps you start conversations with people from your forms. So right when someone fills out a form on your site, they're ready to talk to sales, we do all the routing and qualifying. And if they're qualified, we'll present them with an option to hop on the phone with a rep right now, or they can schedule a call for later. So there's no downtime. There's no waiting for reps to follow up a couple hours later, a couple days later.
Cool. And so I guess on our side, also doing the introduction. So Madkudu, so we're a lead scoring platform, and our goal really is to enable B2B companies to create relevant customer journeys at scale. And so what that means is really helping some of the most amazing B2B SaaS companies out there leverage their data to figure out what is the typical frictionless and successful onboarding path from discovering their product all the way to buying, upselling, being retained, and being delighted. Work with some there going from the fast-growing segments to like the older school but juggernauts like IBM, and going through like companies like Slack. And really the reason why they use us is that they've come to realize that to be successful as B2B SaaS companies and to be successful in their demand gen, it's really critical for them to be extremely relevant with their customers by building these journeys that make sense. And so maybe like a quick forward on lead scoring. So really, lead scoring is at a very high level is just a process where you automate what a rep would typically do to qualify a lead based on information that they have, based on first-party information, so whatever the lead has given you, but also third-party information that you can go and enrich from other places. And generally, one of the things I like to tell people is that ultimately every single company in B2B does some form of lead scoring. And so when you're very early on, the way you start is you have this kind of like gut feeling qualification where you're going to go and filter out anything that's going to be spam or it's going to be personal email. And then you consider, right, if it's like less than 50 employees, but it's still a business email, it's like a pretty good lead. And then if it's over 50 employees, it's a great lead and we want to talk to them quickly. Then generally companies then evolve to, hiring someone in demand gen who's going to be able to go and, configure like a Marketo or a HubSpot with some point-based lead score where you're going to say, all right, if it's like US, if it's a B2B company and they have between this range and this range of employees, then that's a great fit. And otherwise we put them into different buckets. Generally where Madkudu comes into play is really a little bit later on. It's figuring out how you can leverage AI and machine learning to go and learn from your past success to refine all those criterias and say, well, is the US really such an important criteria that if you had a B2B SaaS company that was coming from Israel or for France, would you actually not want to qualify them? And so really the idea is to be able to go and really have a very narrow focus on who your actual best customers are and be able to understand the complexity of a growing business where you now have multiple product lines. You have the ability to cross-sell between those different product lines. You have a sales cycle that's complex, and therefore understanding what the best procurement process on your side is going to be for that customer are really important. So that's really where we fit into the picture. And ultimately, regardless of how you're doing, models are just a mathematical attempt to a representation of reality. And as such, they're always slightly wrong. Like no model is ever going to be 100% accurate. And if you look at any laws of physics, we see that they're always an approximation. And when you look at the more granular level, we see that we can do things differently. But ultimately, the reason why, as humans, we've always been building models to explain our universe is because there's a lot of usefulness in modeling things and being able to make a very educated guess. And so what we want to talk about today is really, how we make these models useful. And so really at Madkudu, what we're focusing on is, fixing a sales process which we believe is broken. And one very clear illustration of how broken our sales process is today is when you look at demo forms. So companies like Drift are evangelizing this by saying like, oh, we should not do forms and things like that. I think beyond that, what we're seeing is that there's a lot of companies that are building these forms that are overly complicated, and there's a lot of research that's been done around that, where essentially people are saying you want to have more fields in there because you want to be able to identify really who are the qualified leads that are requesting a demo, so that you can make sure your sales team is focusing on the right ones. So the curious thing about this is ultimately what you're doing is you're creating a process that is full of friction and full of complexity for your best leads, simply because they're coming along with some lower quality leads. So you're essentially creating a process that's complicated for the right leads just because other people are coming along. So there's got to be a way to do this better. And ultimately, that's one of the things where we started at. So if you start thinking about your forms, you could say, well, if someone, let's say, if Elon Musk at Tesla on the left is, signing up to download an ebook or to actually book a demo, you don't want to go and ask, like, what is the company size of Tesla? Who is Elon Musk? What is your job title, your first name, your security, social security, all of that. You just want to say, all right, like, he's asking for, content, let's just give it to him, and then let's try and build a relation with him. On the flip side, so that's what we're seeing on the right-hand side, if someone is signing up and you're potentially lacking that ability to qualify them on the fly, then it makes sense to actually go and ask for more information. And so what really becomes interesting now is we're starting to say, we want to create a frictionless experience for our good leads, and therefore we build the process for them. Because ultimately your core customers and your best prospects, they're the ones you should be designing your entire marketing flow for, not for your own sales team. And so really thinking about how you do that, I think is a core element. And so being able to score people based on just their email address enables you to create something that's really frictionless. And so if we take it like one step further and we look at kind of the studies that are out there, this has been proven to make sense, where multiple studies have been made to show that fewer form fields actually yield higher conversion rates, which essentially then reduce your cost of acquisition. But also, very interestingly, one of the things that has been found on an ongoing basis is that people actually tend to input garbage information into any field other than their email and their name. So trying to ask for phone numbers or for company sizes is going to just create a lot of noise in your database and potentially frustrate your sales team, because you're now going to book meetings for them with people that are students but pretended they work at a 1,000 employee company. And so that leads us to our kind of next point, is that if you're able to fix that, and you're able to now figure out who should have access quickly to a demo form, the next kind of problem that we see in our process today from a sales standpoint that's broken is that people still have to wait for an email sent by the sales rep to be able to get that demo they've been requesting. And this is what Emil was saying, right? There's this aspect of saying, today we have a process where someone is interested in buying your product, they're going to submit a form, and then they just wait. And they wait for you to send them an email, and that is absurd, right? If someone is willing to give you their money for your product, you would want to be able to have them book a time right now, because ultimately that's what they're trying to do. And we live in a digital age where everyone wants to have everything instantly, and yet we've created this process where people reach out and then they just have to wait. And we actually ran a study around that to see what the average time is to reply to a demo request. So what we've done is through a Mechanical Turk type process, we actually ended up booking a set of demos on about 500 websites, and then we monitored the time it took them to reach back out to us to offer a time to actually, host a demo. And it was just it was kind of a disenchantment at the industry to see how few of these companies were able to reply to us quickly, and actually how many of them didn't reply or replied, more than 5 days later. So that's like, hot leads that are trying to talk to you and you're not able to reply to them quickly just because you need someone to send an email and it's just not necessarily automated, and it kind of doesn't make sense. And I think, it's been very well the time to reply to a demo request impacts the overall conversion rate. So back in 2007, HBR and then Kellogg had run some studies around what is the decrease in response rate based on the time it takes you to reach out to those leads. And essentially what everyone found was that the first 5 minutes are critical, and that if you don't reply within the first 5 minutes, you have just a very drastic decrease in your likelihood to be able to engage with that rep. I think, and recently, actually, on the next slide, we were looking at this update that HBR ran with inside sales, where they again monitored a bunch of companies and how quickly they replied to a demo request. And I think what's really compelling about this slide that they had in their ebook was that they say only 4.7% of companies achieve the optimal 5-minute window. And I had to be kind of struck by that. Is really 5 minutes the optimal? Like, are we really saying that in this digital age of the internet where everything is accessible online, having to wait for 5 minutes is the optimal? And I mean, truly, we all believe this. I think it's absurd, and that's not the case. And so that's why we came up with this Fastlane product. And the idea here is, say, if someone is filling in a form, as we said before, we're able to qualify them in real time. And so as soon as they're going to go and hit the submit button, we're able to show them that they qualify for a Fastlane and that they can actually, right on the spot, book a meeting with the rep that they've been assigned to. And so now we're kind of jump-starting the whole process where they're here, they're asking for the demo. Let's just give them the possibility to book a demo with the rep. And so the reason why most companies don't want to do this typically is because it ends up, if you just open the floodgates and put just your calendar on the website, you're going to have a lot of meetings booked with a lot of unqualified leads, because ultimately 80% of your traffic on the website is low quality. So that's why it's critical to have some form of qualification up front, so that the only people who can book a meeting are actually people that your reps will want to talk to, so that you're not just generating a bunch of frustrated reps. And so beyond kind of the aspect of that and the theory, we've been running also some tests to see, are reps able to generate any kind of lift when they talk to low quality leads? And so we ran a fairly long A/B test with one of our higher volume customers. And so what we looked at was, does it have an impact to call a low quality lead on conversion rate? And so the probability distribution that we see on the top right is showing, essentially the number of successes we're seeing, and the green curve is the conversion rate for people who were being called, and the red is the ones who are not being called. And what's really interesting in that case is that we're just seeing that calling these leads has no impact. So we're saying we have 60 to 80% of our leads that are low quality. Having reps talk to them has no impact on conversion rate. So we're essentially just purely wasting time, both for and mainly for the sales team that are not talking to the right leads. On the flip side, when we actually talk to the right leads, it does have a very significant impact on conversion rate. So everything leads to say that you want to have your reps spend their time with the right kind of leads and just like focus their effort there. And so just very tactically, you know, how can you get started with this? This just a shout out to one of our awesome customers. So Instapage is, for those who don't know, they're a provider of landing pages. And one of the awesome features that they have in there is you can change the redirect of the call to action based on specific drop downs that you have in your form. So let's say if you had a form where you don't have Madkudu, you're not yet able to do like this predictive scoring on the fly, you could just ask for, let's say, company size to make it simple. Then you could say, well, if the company size is within a bucket that makes sense to send to a rep, then you would configure that redirect page to be something where you have a Chili Piper form embedded. And for the other ones, you just send them to a thank you page with, you know, like the standard "we'll be in touch," and then you can send them a webinar. So it becomes really interesting is now you can, with these kind of things, you can start tailoring where you send people based on how qualified they are. And then ultimately, you don't necessarily have to use a SaaS built product. You can also custom build it yourself. It's fairly simple to just, you know, based on an input, actually change the redirect. And of course, kind of the last solution would be to use something like a Madkudu. And the fun thing is, if you come to our demo form and you input your email, we're actually running that qualification in real time with our own lead scoring configured for ourselves. And if you are qualified, then you will get access to Chili Piper and be able to book some time with me. So that's pretty much it on our side. I think there's a lot more that can be done. We have customers who are now even training some of their leads by saying, we'll have, if the lead is really qualified, we'll send them to our best AEs. And if they're, you know, kind of a medium qualified, we'll send them to another router that's going to route them against some of our newer reps that we are starting to train. So I think really the idea is just to start thinking of, if you're able to identify on the fly who are the right leads and which are like medium leads or bad leads, what would you want to build in terms of process, and which kind of calendar router would you want to send them to?
Nice. Awesome. Thanks, Francis. So Francis talked a lot about when people come, fill out a form, qualifying those people, and you guys saw the Chili Piper widget comes up and gives people the option. We actually ran an experiment because just like any funnel, people drop off at certain points. So sometimes they get the Chili Piper option to schedule and they don't book something. So when I first started with Chili Piper, you know, as a marketer, I'm always trying to find things to automate. How can we leverage technology to make our processes better? And so one of the things I noticed was that our reps were following up manually with any lead who fell off in this funnel. So this is, you know, inbound leads come in. If they're qualified, they get these options. And I set up an email template that looks like this. I'm sure if you guys have received an email from a rep, this looks very familiar, right? It's just a link to the calendar. So trying to follow up with someone who didn't book a meeting for whatever reason and seeing if we can get them back onto a call with us. And so about 20, 30 emails in, I hop into our marketing analytics and I notice that nobody is booking with us at all. So I hope you guys like memes. I have a bunch more. So I was super sad and I couldn't figure out why. You know, I see these everywhere. People send each other calendar links all the time. And I was chatting with our sales team during a daily huddle, and they told me that they had been having a lot more success when they send people suggested times in an email. And so suggested times, that's what this looks like. So using Chili Piper, there's a bunch of other tools that do this as well. We have it embedded with Chili Piper. In the email, you can literally choose a couple options, and the person on the other end can just click any of those and boom, one click, they've booked their demo. So I said, you know what, let's just test this. Let's test 50 emails using the manual link, and then we'll do another 50 using suggested times and see what happens. And so just to give you guys a quick visual, you know, this is the process when you send someone just a link to your calendar. They click it, and then they can choose whatever time. I'm sure, again, people are probably very familiar with this. And so suggested times in the next slide, anytime you click on one of those, it's frictionless, right? You click on one, works for you, boom, demo scheduled. So next slide. So here are the results. Link in email, we sent, you guys can see here, 52 emails sent. And the second to last column on the right, clicked email was one person. And so I looked in, and that one person who did even click the link in the email, they did book a demo. So we had a 1.9% conversion rate when we sent people a link follow-up. And then for the suggested times, I made this really, really advanced conversion rate calculator in Excel. And we had 25% of people convert on this one just when we send them suggested times. Literally 3 suggested times in an email follow-up instead of link to calendar. And so this was crazy. We literally saw a 13x increase in meetings booked, literally just by taking a little effort and suggesting times instead of sending a link. And so anytime we run an experiment like this, I like to take a step back and say, what can we learn from this? What other areas can we apply this to? And so the first major learning for me was we removed friction and made the email recipient's decision-making process easier, right? So when I send you a link, it's work on you, versus when I send you some suggested times, the perception is this is a lot easier. I just look at one, yep, 4:30 next Monday works for me. Super simple. And I also think it's that we took the time to make a suggestion and that people appreciate that. Again, it's this frictionless experience where we're saying, here, it's not throwing someone a link and saying, here, you choose. It's like, hey, here's a couple times that work for me, and let me know if any of these work for you. And so this was a pretty cool experiment we ran. I know if you guys have sales teams, or if you're in sales, this is like a really, really cool, easy takeaway to give people. And yeah, that was a fun little experiment that we ran and that I wanted to share today. So I think we're gonna take a couple questions now.
Yeah, awesome. Francis, thanks for taking the time to share that. I'll actually kick off the Q&A while people start to load up their questions. But I guess the big thing is, I was curious to learn that you guys weren't already doing this in-house. It seemed like part of your sales team had started to adopt it. And I think that's something that companies run into a lot, where one salesperson in their corner has a good practice and it doesn't really pan out to the rest of the team, let alone get to the marketing team to connect. And so how do you make sure that experiments like that propagate out, and that when you identify these best practices, especially for you guys, that you get them out to your customers?
Yeah. So for us, it was getting everyone on board, letting them know that we were running the test. I think everyone was actually really curious themselves to see how things would pan out. I actually posted on LinkedIn while we were running it that we were running this test, and a lot of people were really curious about it. So I think people were just naturally curious, because you see it all the time when people send a link to the calendar versus suggested times. And so people were doing this on their own with outreach, but not in our inbound funnel, right? It was kind of like a messy process. Everyone was kind of doing their own thing willy-nilly. And so we just had a team chat. We do daily huddles with the sales team, let them know we were going to run this test. They were all bought in. And so once the results were in, it was like really easy. And, we created a template for everybody to use. And I mean, they saw the results. They want to book demos. So they were totally bought in once we showed them what happened.
And that raises a good point, which actually, Francis, I might ask you this one. How do you see inbound versus outbound activity? Because it seems like there's a lot that both sides can get from each other, but for the most part, we don't really do leads. Outbound activity, we mostly look at it as inbound. And so when we talk about creating a frictionless journey, how do you pair the type of friction you want to remove for inbound and the type of friction you want to remove for outbound, and how do those things sort of differ and compare?
I think ultimately again, it goes back to the thing that you're always doing lead scoring, regardless of what you're doing. But I think when you're doing outbound, you are selecting who you're reaching out to, which is some form of lead scoring. And then how you actually get those leads is, one way or another, it may be through like predictive lead scoring or through your own kind of research and preconceptions of what a good lead is. I think the part that then becomes interesting is as our marketing team, and if we look at how marketing is evolving, this kind of event of ABM, I think, is a good representation of how we are trying to create a relevant journey for companies. And we're going into understanding that we're no longer just selling to individuals where, someone is going to fax in an order, and we actually have to go and educate, the entire company towards what the product does to be able to, to then acquire them. And I think from an outbound standpoint, means understanding where each of these accounts are in their buying cycle, so that the content you send them is extremely relevant, and that the calls to action are relevant. And I think it's very similar then from an inbound standpoint to say, when someone is coming to your website, these are some of the experiments that we do also, is what is the best call to action to show them? So if someone is, a better fit for, an enterprise sales process, then the call to action should be booking a demo and then pushing them to, a Chili Piper calendar, for example. If someone is very early on in their understanding of the product as an account and they're coming to the website, maybe it's more educational content that you want to send. I think those are, ultimately, it's really just about figuring out what would an individual rep, and I think that's like very similar to what Emil was saying. I think when you're thinking about anything that you're building in MarTech or in your marketing processes, it's think about what would a super smart individual rep do, and how do I take that at scale? Because a smart rep, if they had control over the website, they would want to change what the lead is seeing based on who they are, based on what they're looking for. They would want to make their calendar available. I think ultimately, today, the awesome thing as marketers is that we now have access to technologies and tools that allow us to take our imagination and start implementing it at scale.
Awesome. So we got a question from the audience, which I think is pretty pertinent. For both of you guys, at what size sales team do you start to see that the solutions make sense? So for Emil, when do you think a sales team should look at getting a solution like Chili Pepper? And then likewise, Francis, for lead scoring. I know we touched on that a little bit in it, but yeah, I'll let Emil take it away.
Yeah, I'm probably biased when I say this, but I feel like everyone coming to your site should have an amazing experience. I don't know if it's so much a sales team size versus, what kind of experience are you delivering to your customers, right? Even if you don't have a ton of leads coming in every day, maybe they're all high value, and you want each person to have an amazing experience where they're not waiting to be followed up with a sales rep. So my answer to that one is always like, I think anyone who has a business can benefit from our tools. But typically it's like, companies with at least a couple inbound reps and that are generating inbound lead flow. That's who it makes the most sense. Like they're, pining for our solution.
Makes sense. And maybe like quickly on our side, so we've somewhat open sourced one of our lead scores. So if you go to Zapier, Zapier offers a lead score, and that's kind of one of our models embedded in the background. And the idea behind that is, I think for us, it's not necessarily the team size that matters. It's really the kind of the maturity of the lead scores that you've been building in the past. I think it's really important to have gone through the process of building one internally and seeing the downfalls of maintaining it, updating it, missing on some information. That makes sense to be the trigger to introduce us. And so that's why if you want to build some of these flows that we were talking about, I think using that Zapier lead score, or even using, like I said, Instapage to then route to a Calendly page based on some information, is a great place to start. And whenever you start seeing that your reps are talking to leads that are not necessarily qualified, that's when it makes sense to bring a predictive player like Madkudu to actually make sure that the reps are focusing their time and their energy on leads that are qualified.
And Emil, I know you guys have been, I would say, you guys have been evolving your messaging over the past few months. And it seems like you're starting to go beyond scheduling, really looking at something that's near and dear to our heart, this VIP buyer experience. Suzanne asked a really good question, which is, how do you see chat tools playing a role in this? When we start to look at automating this process, especially from a high value target user acquisition, how do you see chat tools playing into this part of the customer journey?
Yeah, I think I'll address both. So my question would be, is it before someone comes into your site and opts in, or is it after? We've talked about, right now we have the option to start a phone call after you enter information or schedule a time. We've talked about also adding in chat functionality, right? So if someone opts in and their preferred method is chat, we're going to build that for our customers, presumably after. Yeah, so we've talked about it. We haven't had a ton of people come to us asking for it. But our policy at Chili Piper is if enough people are asking for it, we're going to build it. So I think it makes sense. I see that being in our roadmap for sure. Our whole thing is we want to connect with people on their terms. Some people want to schedule a demo for later. Cool. We give them that option. Some people are evaluating a couple solutions and need something quickly, want to talk to someone right now. Great. We have that as well. And then some people just want to chat and collect more info and, they're on their mobile and want to do it that way. So I do see that as being something we will build in the future.
Yeah, and quickly on our side, so great question, Suzanne. And yeah, it turns out I know you guys use Drift. So very interestingly, Drift is actually a tool into which we build also a native integration so that whenever you start a chat with someone and they input their email, you can run the Madkudu score to figure out, do I want to show a calendar? Do I want to start a conversation with a live agent, or do I just want to send them to a webinar registration page? So I think, again, the chat in a sense is, especially Drift, right? Their goal is to replace the form. So I think that in that sense, they're really a tool to obtain some information about the lead, but then the idea of creating the frictionless journey is pretty much the same afterwards. As soon as you get that information from them, you want to figure out, okay, now what is the next most relevant thing to offer this lead based on who they are, without, of course, hurting too much your sales team. And so that was actually one of the first experiments that we ran with Segment and Drift back in the day, was to score leads that were coming onto the website through an IP lookup, and then determining who we should show a chat to. And the call to action on the chat was booking a demo with someone. So I think, yeah, to me, they're really just a way of acquiring that information. The one thing I will say is, even though I think they are a very core part of the future, today there's still a lot of people that are buying software that want to go through the process of filling a form and picking a time for a later point in time, and not necessarily having to have that conversation on the fly.
Awesome. Well, guys, we've kind of come up at the end of our time for today. So, Emil, I know you've got ukulele practice and you got to get out of here. I don't want to.
I was waiting for a ukulele comment.
And Francis, I know you got to run around too. So guys, I really wanted to thank you guys for coming together. This was really great to see how these two worlds come together and complement each other. Thanks to everyone who joined us, and thanks especially to the people who asked questions. If you have any questions and want to follow up with us, we'll be sending a follow-up email, and feel free to talk with us as well. So thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you sometime soon.
Thanks everyone.
Excellent. Thanks everyone.